Chapter 4. Achilles woke up, head throbbing. His tongue felt thick and dry, and his head felt like a smith had pounded it all night. He sat up quickly and immediately regretted it. Chauncey, ah! He whimpered as the pain lanced through his skull. There was glass everywhere from a shattered bottle of cheap brandy. The last few days were one giant blur as Achilles crawled over to his dresser. The chest was smashed, and he could see ripped-up papers strewn about the tiny hovel. Chauncey wasn't anywhere to be seen. Achilles pulled himself onto the stool next to the table. Every sound thundered in his skulls, and his tongue felt thick and fuzzy. His throat hurt and felt cracked and dry. "I lost it," he muttered. "I lost my only shot at killing that bastard." He brooded for a few minutes before he got to his feet and limped out into the blinding sun. His eyes stung, and all he could think about was getting some water. He made his way out into the street. It looked close to noon, and the smell of various stews and strange meats wafted through the Raff district. Making his way to the public well, he stood in line for a good 20 minutes, and unfortunately, he wasn't the only one there who needed a bath. Achilles dumped a bucket of cold water over his head. He couldn't afford a bath, and so stale well water was his only option. He lowered the bucket again and took a long dreg before dumping the rest of it over himself again. The water had a stale, coppery taste to it, probably due to the mines. He shivered despite the heat and sloshed back down the street. It took him several minutes to realize that he didn't have anywhere to go. Looking up, he saw the Crystal Palace saloon in the distance. He fished around in his pockets and found a few coins. Enough to forget, for a while at least. He shrugged as he sloshed into the tavern. There weren't very many patrons, but that wasn't surprising, considering that payday was a few short days away. Achilles sloshed down onto a table and put his hand up in the air. "Can I help you?" a very annoyed waitress said as she stared at the water dripping onto the floor. "Cheap and strong," Achilles said as he set his last few coins on the table. The waitress snatched them up and gave him a derisive snort as she walked back to the bar. Achilles drummed his fingers on the table in annoyance. "Is this seat taken?" a man asked, walking up to the table. Achilles stared up to see a man he knew all too well. His clean clothes and scar over his left cheek marked him well. "Not interested," Achilles retorted. The man smiled, flashing a brilliant white smile. He was definitely good-looking and built. He looked like a miner who was washed and all dressed up. "The name's Switch, and as long as I'm talking, I'm buying," he said as he pulled out the seat across from Achilles and raised his hand. The waitress was at his side so fast, Achilles blinked in surprise. "Whatever," he ordered. "Cancel it. Why don't you bring us some of Pete's good whiskey, on my tab?" Switch said, flashing his grin again. "Anything for you, darling," the woman said. Achilles thought he could detect the same disdain in her tone that she'd spoken to him in, but she concealed it well. "You look like you've fallen on some hard times, friend." Achilles didn't say anything. "I noticed your limp as you came in. Pretty hard to find mine work with a bum leg," Switch said as the waitress set 2 glasses on the table, followed by a bottle. As she poured the liquid, Achilles eyed Switch like a mouse eyed a cat. "Thanks, sweetness," Switch said, picking up his glass and sipping it. Achilles grabbed his glass and took a large dreg. The liquid burned his throat, and he couldn't stifle the cough that followed. "It's good stuff, isn't it?" Switch said, smiling. "You can take your time. There's no need to rush. I promise no matter what you say, I'll leave the bottle." Achilles snatched the whiskey and topped off his glass. He knew Switch's reputation, and he trusted him about as much as he trusted a mage. "Look, friend, I can see that you're wanting to be alone, but just remember that I know what you're going through," he said as he upended his glass. "It doesn't hurt to have a few good friends to pull you out of the gutter." If you find yourself in need of a friend, then you know where to find me." Switch smiled as he stood and walked back to his table. Achilles never took his eyes off the man. He took another gulp and abruptly started coughing. "Sip it, friend." Switch called from across the bar, flashing his too white grin.